Welcome back, everyone. This is Faith on Fire, and I'm Brian, and this is the BTWN guy who loves to do video after video after video, just praising John MacArthur. And in this video, it's more along the lines of defending John MacArthur with lies. And you're going to see proof of it in his own video in just a few minutes. But I'm going to play the clips. You'll get that. All right, quick change of plans in post-editing. I decided that rather than have you wait to see the clips, I'm going to start the clips now, then I'll kind of backtrack. So the key part in which this gentleman lies on behalf of John MacArthur in this article is right here. Let's watch it.
Now, this public shaming of the woman was a biblical thing that Pastor John did. There's a video included in this, Pastor John, at a communion service. Well, you can call it public, but I'm not sure how public it was when it was a church communion service where
there's a video of it. It's very public. 20 years later, we're still seeing the video.
He called her out and said that, she's been involved in this situation. She's not forgiving her husband, and she should forgive her husband.
A sexual predator, child abusing husband.
With all the information that the elders had, that's the decision that they made. And turns out later on that he was even more than a child abuser, but he was a sexual child abuser. Now, the article points out that at the time of...
This is the lie, by the way. Listen closely. I'm going to point out something. And I looked at a lot of his comments, and I didn't see anyone else point it out. Some people disagreed with his take on this for sure. But out of all the comments I read on his own video, I never saw anyone point out the obvious lie here. But I'm going to point it out to you so you'll see it.
The church discipline, this I highlighted right here, that Elaine had not yet reported her husband's physical and mental abuse to the police. And at the time, Ellen was not aware of his sexual abuse. Neither was Pastor John. Neither were the elders that were interacting with and the counselors that were trying to help the couple. The church was doing all they could to minister to this couple.
No, they weren't. They were just siding with the man as they would do in a church like his. Now, understand that I'm going to blow up this section of it so you can see. He highlighted the purple part just to tell his gullible audience how the woman, Eileen Gray, who's the victim here, along with her children, of this abusive husband, emotional abuse, physical harm to the children, physical abuse, and what it would turn out later, no surprise, sexual abuse even beyond that, and the guy's in jail for 20 to life. But anyway, and that's a picture of the guy you see right here on the left. That's the guy, David Gray, his wife, Eileen Gray, that the church is putting pressure on to bring him back because he's supposedly repentant. Well, I got more to say about that later, but look at the line directly below what he just read. Yes, so she had not reported it to the police, but it says right there underneath the line, he's looking at it. It says, instead, she had reported the abuse to elders and pastors of Grace Community Church. He just said that they didn't know about any of the abuse. But then later he says over and over again that he kept emphasizing that they did the best they could with the information they had because he was totally repentant. He repented during the counseling sessions. So the pastors and elders met with the man. What did they think he was repenting for? That they were pushing this woman to get back with him. And luckily she didn't, because 2 years later the guy's going to jail for all kinds of horrific things. He was a sexual predator. Anyway, so back to the original part of the video I was doing. And so it's be a little bit out of order, but let me go back after this point right here. But I have a couple other reasons for doing this video, because I normally would never come out here, even though I've been asked by fans of the channel, did you hear about this scandal at Grace Community Church or with John MacArthur? Did you hear that one? Why don't you do a video about it? I always don't do that. If I talked about John MacArthur, which I have on this channel, it's always been based on the Bible and a difference of theology and interpretation of the Bible, and gone down that road. That's been the discussion. And those are hot topics in itself. Right? Controversial items sometimes, depending on denominations and theories and philosophies and so forth. And so I've got a big issue with John MacArthur and his teachings on a lot of issues. That being said, I normally wouldn't do a video like this, but this one kind of hits close to home to me because it's involving a child abuse, sexual abuse situation, and I'm going to share a personal story. Now, don't jump ahead of me. It's not, these things did not happen to me, but I'm going to share a personal story about what happened to friends of mine a long time ago, and let it be a lesson to all you families out there, your parents out there, right? I'm going to give you some tremendous advice that works in this household and with my kids. But I'm going to get to the personal story first of what happened with another sexual predator that came into our midst many years ago. And so wait for that story. Second part of this video is, and I'll just do it right now. This has to do with a woman who went to her church because of child abuse from her husband, emotional and physical, which turned out later was actually sexual child abuse on top of that. But at the time, they just knew about the emotional child abuse and the physical abuse of the children. And so this guy's name is David Gray. He's now serving a long sentence in jail, by the way, but this is 20 years ago. And he didn't go to jail yet. That would happen about 2 years later. So he was on staff at Grace Community Church. What a wonderful guy. They have a sexual predator on their staff back then, and they just didn't even know it. But they did know he was an abuser because he apparently admitted it to it. And this guy says so in his video. He says he sincerely repented of it at the time. And therefore, they thought the best advice was that her wife, Eileen Gray, should take him back into the marriage. And she was like, I'm not having that. She filed a restraining order. She did not go to the police first. She went to the pastors and elders of the church first. Ladies, big mistake. Don't make the same mistake. Luckily, this woman was smart and didn't take their advice. But don't think, and you'll see in my personal story why this is true, what I'm saying. Don't go to your church with these things. They'll cover it up most of the time. Right, and they're going to, especially in a church like John MacArthur's church, forget it. They're going to take the side of the man over the woman, no matter what the allegation is, right? So you go to the police, a real investigation gets done. They interview the right people and the witnesses and the kids and so forth, and then the guy goes to court 2 years later, and he's thrown in jail for like 20-something to life. Now, just recently, his parole hearing came up after like 20 years, and they decided, no, this guy is no good, and they suggested he stay in jail for another 10 years. So he's not going anywhere. Thank God, right? We don't need more of these people out on the street. So if you're a woman who's in the first point, if you're a woman who is involved in any kind of relationship with a man who is emotionally or physically abusive to you or any other kind of abuse, sexual included, to your kids, get away from this dude, right? And don't go to the church, go to the police. That's my advice. I'm sticking with that. So ultimately, since she would not take the husband back, they considered her to be the one who is living in sin. So John MacArthur gets before the church, publicly denounces this lady by name, Eileen Gray, and says she's living in sin, and due to church discipline, Matthew 18 church discipline, totally misapplied in this case, decides that this needs to go public with the church, and she'll need to be excommunicated, and let's give her over to Satan, cast her out, and she's no longer part of the congregation. But this guy's coming out, and he has two different stories contradicting himself within the same 20 minutes. Number one, he says, and you'll see this in a second, this is the lie he repeats over and over again, that the pastors and elders didn't know anything about the abuse. On the other hand, he says their argument for the wife taking the husband back was because he had repented of those sins, and they took him at his word and believed that he was sincere. You can't have both at the same time. One other thing that I want to mention, very important, that came out in the report, and that is that the advice of the pastors and elders to the woman, to the wife, was forgive your husband, which no indication she didn't forgive the husband, but she ain't letting him around the kids anymore. Right? That was smart. So she needed to take him back, right, and forgive him, and then live a life modeling for her children what it's like to suffer for Christ at the hands of an abuser. I mean, can you imagine? No wonder this woman didn't take their advice. That's horrible advice. I mean, that is almost criminal to say, let's cover this whole thing up rather than report this to authorities, put these kids' lives in danger, this wife's life in danger, and then tell her that she's modeling Christ by suffering at the hand of this man, and that's somehow a godly woman. Only a teaching like that could come out of John MacArthur's church. That's how much John MacArthur, and from the top down, these people disrespect and have no women and don't value women whatsoever, but have ultimate highest authority is any man, no matter how evil or wicked the man is. But without further ado, let's watch the point where he gets into the article and lies through his teeth. Here we go. All right, so I'm not going to repeat this one right here. I already played it for you closer to the beginning, but now I'm going to go on to some other clips that I want to share with you of this video where he continues to repeat this unbelievable lie about how innocent everybody at Grace Community Churches that tried to just help this poor sinful woman, bamboozled by a predator. Anyway, let's watch the clips.
And here's the video of John MacArthur shaming Eileen Gray on August 18th. And the way it's written as if this isn't something that's good. Yes, turns out that they were mistaken in the long run, but with all the information that they had, they did what they thought was best, and they practiced church discipline, which includes publicly telling the members of the church, hey, this person's in unrepentant sin, or her husband's completely repentant, and she won't take him back.
Of course, the woman is the evil, sinful one who's not willing to change. Exactly what was her sin? Did she abuse her own children, or is the guy? Oh, that's right. I forgot. It's the guy. It wasn't the woman who was doing this evil act and while being employed at Grace Community Church. It's the man doing that. But no, he's perfectly fine. Let's publicly shame the woman. Remember that story in the Bible where they brought that woman caught in adultery to Jesus? I mean, they wanted to publicly shame her. They never said a thing about the man who was obviously caught in the act as well. And that woman was really guilty of that. And Jesus still forgave her. But here we have the public shaming of a woman who just wants to protect her children and herself from a sexual predator. At least at the time, maybe it was not known that he was that far off, but gone into it. But at least protect herself and her kids from a physical abuser.
The elders were bamboozled. The guy came across as very credible, extremely credible.
And she's a woman, so she has no credibility in John MacArthur's church.
And they were duped. But how much fault can we place on them? That's the question, because
well, enough blame could be put on them that the police charged 2 of the pastors at Grace Community Church with misconduct on this matter. So what about that, BTWN guy?
That's the charges that are being made is, hey, this is all a cover-up. This is all a cover-up. It's not a cover-up because of what wasn't known at the time. In 2004, 2 staff pastors were written up by the LAPD for their alleged mishandling of David Gray's abuse. That's the guy's name, David and Eileen Gray. That's the couple. And he used to be on staff at Grace Community Church. After the counseling and the public, the communion where they did church discipline, he wasn't asked to come back on staff. When he was arrested, he was working at a different school, not at Grace Community Church.
You're going to find out in my personal story I'm about to tell you after these few clips here how eerily similar this pattern in churches are of covering up pedophiles and sexual predators and child abusers and just simply pushing them off to, as what he said, to go work at another school. At the time he actually got arrested, you'll see the eerie connection between my personal story I'm going to share and what you're hearing here that this man is defending.
But the question came up, did the elders and the counselors, the pastors that were dealing with this couple, did they do what they should be doing? Or should have they got the police involved? Should they have gotten the police involved?
Yes.
What she's talking about as letters and harassment and stalking is the biblical practice of trying to call someone to repentance. Church members were going to them. Some of their friends were going to her and saying, hey, you need to do the right thing. Everyone at the time thought the man was repentant. Everyone did. And the mother didn't know about the sexual abuse. There was excessive physical punishment, big time excessive physical punishment, of which the father appeared to be extremely repentant of. Who's the target in all this article? Don't forget that. The target is Pastor John MacArthur. And 3/4 of the way through the article, Elaine told the Roy's report that MacArthur never spoke with her before, during, or after the shaming, after the biblical discipline. He was going by his trusted elders, who, when you read their account, they did the very best they could with the information that they had. It makes it clear that the staff and the pastors and the members at Grace Community Church did everything that they could to help this woman. They really did everything that they could. I find no purposeful misdeeds in any way. Slanderous piece by Julie Royce. Julie Royce, restoring the church. Go figure. She should be ashamed of herself. So should, what is it? Judd. Yeah, Judson University gives her money. Write a letter to Judson University. Ridiculous. Julie Royce. It's sad. You know what? With all the stuff going on in this world, you've got people like her. 39 articles, writing articles about things that were 20 years ago that really, if you read the article at face value, if everything she says in the article is true, what they're guilty of is being bamboozled by this one David Gray and taking his side of the story. What frustrates me is all the non-Calvinists who just love this, the anti-Calvinists who love this, and those who are against patriarchy, those who are against Pastor John, just loving stuff like this. It's frustrating. Anyway, another week from now, nobody will be talking about it, except Julie Royce. She's going to write more. She's going to have a follow-up article with more details. Shame on her.
So now I want to get on to the personal story. And this also ties into the story about the child abuse. And a good tip for parents will come out of this, or advice for parents. Okay, so let me go back to my junior high and high school days. So I went to a private Christian school that was very small, a small non-denominational Christian school. If I were to put a label on it, even though there was no label, I would say the style of the Wednesday chapel service. We had every Wednesday, we had a chapel service, a praise and worship, and a sermon, often given by the pastor of the church or one of the teachers or an outside pastor or preacher who would come in every week on Wednesday, chapel service. And so I went there 7th to 12th grade, and if I were to give a style to it, I'd say it's closest to Baptist. How about that, right? Give you an idea. And there, I had a Spanish teacher. And it turns out, I would learn this years later, that even though he sang in the chapel band, beautiful voice, and people admired him, and he preached to all the kids on occasion, took a turn to preach something, and could preach phenomenal. Everyone looked forward to when this guy would be preaching out of all the teachers. There might be one other teacher that was a little more skilled at it, I'd say. But this was one of the top teachers where you knew if he was going to give a preaching, he was going to make it interesting, and you're going to learn something. It was going to be good, and bless you. This guy was a wolf in sheep's clothing if there ever was. So he molested over sleepovers several of my friends that went to sleepovers. I never went to any of them, so I was never affected by this personally and never even knew it happened. But several of my friends in grades, in my grade, above my grade, and one below my grade, right? And this would have been around my, this probably would have happened through like 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Those were the years that this guy was there. He was a sexual predator, and he did some really awful things with these boys. And they didn't tell their parents, they didn't tell their friends. So after I went on after 12th grade, didn't know anything about this and no one else did really, this teacher went over to a different church in the local area at the time, another bigger church that also had a school. And he got a job there. He served in that church and he was a teacher in that church's private school. And I have friends that go to that church as well that I know to this very day. And this guy went on to do the same behavior. But this time, some kids spoke up and the parent told the parents, and the parents, like this woman, Eileen Gray, went first to the pastor of the church and to the elders of the church, and they swept it under the rug, said there's no reason to get the police involved, and they tried to make a big cover up, and it ultimately said, let's get this guy out of here. We'll just get him out of here, right? And so they did that. Well, what do you think happened next? Nothing gets done. No one finds out about anything until years later. Big scandal in that church came out years later. Well, this guy went on to move all the way across the country to Las Vegas. And where do you think he got a job? At a church and as a teacher in a private school for that church. And he did the same thing to young boys there. But this time, it did go to the police. He got arrested. He's in jail. But then, because of this news coming out, some of the kids back where I grew up, now as adults, years later, they bring this up. So this is probably like 15 years after it initially happened, maybe as much as 20 years. I think it's more like 20 years now. And this is still years ago now, but they finally went to the police and said, this is what this guy did to us all the way back in like 1989, 90, 91. And so the police had him extradited from Las Vegas all the way back to this other state. And he stood trial, and these boys from the church and my private school, both private schools, were able to confront him, and they convicted him of his crimes. This guy's never going to not be in jail. I mean, his sexual sin and addiction to that, the creepiness of the whole thing, it was it ruined lives, but it also ruined his own life completely. And so the point is, parents, sometimes if this stuff happens to your kids, you're never going to learn about it for 20 years. They're going to be embarrassed. They're going to think they did something wrong. And they don't want to admit it to their friends or anybody. They leave it just, inside. It's horrible, but that's what happened. And so I didn't find out this ever happened with this guy that I sat in his Spanish class for 2 years straight, and admired him as he preached from the pulpit on occasion on his turn, sang beautifully in the choir and everything else during the praise and worship time. I mean, that's what happens. So guess what? When you find this abuse happens, go straight to the police. Don't go to the church. Churches will sometimes cover it up. And that's what they did. And so my advice to parents at this point is, let me tell you about a hard and fast rule we have in the house. So my two boys are not allowed to do any sleepovers. They're not allowed to have sleepovers at this house. Now, when I first presented this to my wife, when the first one was born, he was pretty young, and I said, by the way, I want to have this rule. And I explained to her. She didn't think that was necessary. And I explained why. I said it's for their protection, because if something were to happen, we may not know of it for a long time, but they'll live with the reality for a long time, and it'll affect them. And so she came around and agreed with me on that. But then something came up where, this family we really know well. And they're going to have a sleepover. And we know it's just this one kid and our older son and their parents we know very well. And of course, in this case, it's okay, right? And I had to explain to my wife, no, it's never okay. Here's why. We don't ever want to have an argument with our kids about which kid it's okay to sleep over and which kid it's not okay to sleep over. It's just across the board. Let's just have them understand that's the rule, and we'll never have to deal with it again. And besides, even if there's no problem, and there probably won't be, but even if there was no problem and everything's great, they're still going to stay up late. They're still going to probably have a bunch of junk food, and they're going to get cranky all the next day and give us some problems. So let's just have our kids come home at the end of the day and go to bed in our house, and that's it. End of the play date. It's over. And so long and the short of it is, and by the way, if I didn't say this before, I think I did, but the guy's mode of operation was always he would get involved in sleepovers with kids in the church. And that's where he did his thing, in the middle of the night. Creep. Unbelievable. Well, anyway, so recently, it was only weeks ago, my son said, I've got a birthday party to go to. I need to get a card and a present for one of my friends at school, and they're having a birthday party. And it was a Friday or Saturday night. I don't remember which one now, but he said, I want to go to that. I'm like, Sure, you can go to that. I know some of the kids that are going, and I didn't quite know their family or anything, but my son's judgment for friends is very good. And so I said, okay. And he said, I want you to pick me up at 10 o'clock. So I'm thinking the party's over at 10 o'clock, right? So at 10 o'clock, I call. They're only less than 5 minutes away in a neighboring neighborhood. And I said, it's 10 o'clock. You want me to come pick you up? He's like, yep, sure. I'm ready to go. Okay. So I go over there, and I realized all these kids are still there. And so I said, oh, I'm sorry, the party's not over. Did you want to stay for a little while longer? And I don't want to, have you have to stop early, and everyone's still here. And he looks at me and he says, oh, no, they're not leaving at all tonight. It's a sleepover party. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. He says, oh, yeah, when I got invited for that, I just told him I can come to 10 o'clock, but I don't do sleepovers. He put it on himself to say, this is my rule now because of our rule. And that's my advice to you parents. You do something like this, you're not only protecting your kids, and it might be overprotective, but better safe than sorry. But it's training them up right to make good quality decisions for themselves. And they don't even have to understand really why. Why can't I sleep? It doesn't even matter. So the point is, that's the story. So back on this gentleman here, we have this continuation over 20 minutes of him trying to defend the indefensible in John MacArthur. And because of the connection with the personal story I just gave you, because of the two different articles that were written, one's true, the one about First Baptist London was not true, and the different reactions to who is eligible to work at a church, I think that a good-meaning unbeliever who serves in a church and with a right attitude, and you never know. We don't have crystal ball or a scanning device to know what's really in the heart of men and women when it comes down to it. But there are places to serve in a church. But have no doubt about it, Grace Community Church's discretion is severely lacking to hire someone who has got this kind. And it's not like it wasn't reported to them. They kept him on even though this was reported to them by the wife. But they demonize the wife. They don't give her much credit. And everything is, the man. And so this guy's serving in jail. And John MacArthur apparently writes a letter to them that's reported in this thing. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically it's, you're our missionary at that state prison. And he basically commends him for being an evangelist inside the church, which, who says he is? But it's endless. 20 years later, no recognition of how awful the church called it on that case. Never once did anyone question the pastors or elders inside the church or the members, nor did any of them come out and say, we really blew that. John MacArthur's never mentioned it again. But he does make sure he upholds the good name of David Gray, the sexual predator, and never has apologized for trashing the name or saying she's living in sin, Eileen Gray, which shows you the character of these men is pretty low. Pretty low. They have no character and they have no integrity. Why listen to what they have to preach about? Is it any wonder they preach the heresy of Calvinism? No, it's no wonder. Right? Anyway, so that's my message. In the end, this guy here is going to complain about complain about Julie Roy's and any other YouTube. Now I would be in the mix of that, who dare speak out against John MacArthur. We're the horrible people. They're the good people. And what else do you need to know about their lack of integrity in this whole thing? They will go to any length to defend one another, especially their cult leader, John MacArthur. And that's really what he is. And you don't go against cult leaders if you know anything against cults. They will defend them till the very end, no matter what crazy or dumb thing they do. I hope this is eye-opening and I don't know if I could say encouraging, but at least there's some lessons to be applied here that we can apply to at least keep ourselves and our kids safer in the future. And I'll end finally with it. I'm going to be like a broken record here, but women, don't go to the church if you're dealing with an abusive spouse. Go to the police. That's it. Now, may the peace and love of Jesus Christ be with you now and forever. Amen. Bye-bye.